Hey, welcome. Today we're going to get into something that every single one of us does all day, every day. Making decisions. Yeah, from the small stuff like what to eat for lunch to the huge, life-changing ones like which career to follow. We're going to break down the science of how we actually choose and maybe even find a framework to get a whole lot better at it.
You've been there, right? Staring at a menu or a spreadsheet or maybe two different job offers, and your brain just freezes. You feel completely stuck. Well, it turns out there's a really good reason for that paralysis. It's not just you. Our brains are actually up against some pretty serious challenges.
So if we want to make better decisions, first we have to figure out why we struggle so much. The source material for this actually points to 4 fundamental hurdles that are always getting in our way, turning what seems like a simple choice into a really complex problem.
Okay, first up, there's structure. A routine problem like, say, reordering supplies for the office is way easier than a fuzzy one, like trying to launch a brand new product. Then you've got cognitive limitations. Our brains just don't have infinite processing power. You also have to deal with uncertainty, like trying to predict next quarter's sales when you only have half the data. And finally, conflicting objectives, where picking the cheapest option might totally sacrifice quality. It's a minefield.
And that cognitive limit? It's not just a feeling, it's very real. Research, sometimes called Miller's Law, shows that most of us can only hold between 5 and 9. That's it, 5 and 9 distinct things in our working memory at one time. So any decision that's more complex than that, and our brain literally starts to buckle under the pressure.
So, if our brains are so easily overwhelmed, how in the world are we supposed to tackle big, complicated decisions? Well, that is where having a structured model comes into play. A Nobel laureate named Herbert Simon developed a framework that can bring a little bit of order to all that chaos.
And as you can see, Simon's model takes that whole messy process and turns it into a clear 4-phase roadmap. It's designed to take us from that very first, something's up feeling, all the way to a successful solution, just one logical step at a time.
So let's walk through these phases. First is the intelligence phase. Think of this as your reconnaissance mission. You're scanning the environment, gathering data, and clearly defining what the problem actually is. Next up is the design phase, where you get creative. You invent, develop, and analyze all the possible actions you could take. Then comes the choice phase. This is the moment of truth, where you pick the best alternative. And finally, implementation. You put your choice into action, and, this is key, you watch to see if it's actually working.
Now, during that design and choice phase, this really powerful idea comes into play called satisficing. And no, it's not about being lazy or settling. It's actually about being incredibly practical. It just means finding a solution that is good enough, one that meets all your core needs, without getting totally lost trying to find some mythical, perfect answer that might not even exist.
And this really shows the trade-off, doesn't it? Optimization, searching for the absolute single best solution, can take forever and cost a fortune. Satisficing, on the other hand, recognizes that the extra work to go from a 95% solution to a 99% solution often just isn't worth it. In a world with limited time and information, good enough is very often the most rational choice you can make.
Okay, so now we have a rational model. We should be flawless decision-making machines, right? Well, not so fast. It turns out that even when you have the perfect map, our brains have their own weird ways of navigating the world, and they're filled with all sorts of hidden traps.
These are called heuristics. You can think of them as mental shortcuts or just rules of thumb. For a crazy complex problem like the traveling salesman, finding the shortest route between dozens of cities, calculating every single possibility is basically impossible. So a heuristic is a simple rule like, just go to the closest city next. It's not perfect, but it's fast and it works pretty well.
But, and this is a big but, here's the catch. These incredibly useful shortcuts have a dark side. They open the door for systematic errors in our thinking, which we know as cognitive biases. So yeah, heuristics make us fast, but they can also make us dead wrong. First on our list of major biases is availability. This is our brain's tendency to judge how likely something is based on how easily we can remember an example of it.
So our brain makes this little mistake. It confuses easy to remember with likely to happen. Because images of something like a plane crash are so dramatic and they stick in our memory, we might start to feel that flying is way riskier than it actually is. Our judgment gets swayed by how vivid the memory is, not by the actual data.
Another really powerful mental trap is adjustment and anchoring. This bias is all about how we get stuck on the very first piece of information we get.
This is all about the power of that first number. Once an initial value, an anchor, is dropped in our minds, like last year's sales figures, we have a really hard time adjusting far enough away from it, even if the world is completely changed. Every judgment we make after that is skewed by that starting point.
Then you've got the representativeness bias. This is basically our brain relying way too much on stereotypes to make quick judgments.
We try to figure out a situation based on how well it fits a mental picture we already have, and we often totally ignore the actual odds. You know, if it looks like a duck and quacks like a duck, our brain just shouts, "It's a duck!" without ever stopping to ask how many other kinds of birds might be in the area.
And the last hidden trap we're going to cover is motivational bias. This is where what we want to be true totally clouds our judgment about what is true.
This one is really just wishful thinking on steroids. Our own motivations, our own goals, can unconsciously warp how we see a situation. Our own incentives can make us see the world not as it is, but as we really, really wish it would be.
So we've got this clean, rational model on one hand, and this messy, biased, shortcut-taking brain on the other. What's the solution? How do we put all this together to actually start making smarter choices?
Well, the goal isn't to get rid of our brain's fast, intuitive system. That's impossible, and we wouldn't want to. The real key is to use the slow, structured thinking of Simon's model to challenge our intuition. So for example, during the design phase, you can consciously ask yourself, am I only looking at options that are anchored to last year's plan? Or, in the choice phase, you can ask, is my gut feeling being swayed by a really memorable but super rare event? See? The model gives you the questions to catch the biases.
And that, right there, is the big takeaway. It's a two-part solution. You need the roadmap, that's the process, and you need the self-awareness to know when your own mind might be leading you off the path. That combination is what turns a good decision into a great one.
So as we wrap up, I'll just leave you with this question to chew on. The next time you're facing a choice, whether it's big or small, how are you going to approach it differently? Are you going to walk through those 4 phases? Are you going to stop and ask yourself if a bias is creeping in? By putting process and awareness together, you really do have the power to choose better. Thanks for tuning in.